Hey, good evening. Thank you all for carving out some time on your, what is today, Wednesday evening, to join us on our roadmap to thriving for the second district. I appreciate you joining us. Hope you all had a good Wednesday and a good week. I am Supervisor Holly Mitchell, proudly representing LA County's second district, and I want to welcome you to our virtual roundtable on infrastructure equity. And we're going to talk about what those two words mean very shortly. You know, infrastructure is such an integral part of really how we live our lives. Everything from accessing the internet to being able to safely catch a bus to go to work to how our kids get to and from school safely. So every day we rely on infrastructure really to make our communities function. And from my perspective as a elected official and a policymaker, you know, infrastructure is important that it's built and constructed and maintained equitably across all regions. So that's why I think this conversation is really so important and timely. I don't know if you saw it in the news last night or the paper this morning. Just yesterday, our U.S. Senate voted to approve $550 billion in a brand new spending plan to invest in major infrastructure needs. I remain hopeful, crossing my fingers and toes and everything, that it will get to the president's desk and that he will sign it. But it's a really good opportunity for us here in LA County. You know, the last time we've seen this kind of investment from the federal government in infrastructure, it was back in 1956 under the leadership of President Eisenhower when he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act. Pardon me. That's what happens when you eat popcorn minutes before you go live on StreamYard. It gets stuck in your throat. But again, it was the Federal Aid Highway Act, 1956. So this investment in our infrastructure has been a long time coming. That act intended to solve a worthy problem, but in its path, it created new horrific problems that disproportionately impacted so many segments of our community. Those highways in many communities erased communities of color. They decimated home ownership in the African American community. It created generational pollution, and it bifurcated, it segregated, and cut us off from one another. And there are so many examples of that across LA County and really this entire state and country. Again, we believe it helped exacerbate the climate crisis that we're currently facing. So here's our opportunity to reverse some of that negative history. So as we look to this $550 billion investment at the federal level, the question really is for our region, how can we ensure that we build back better? We want to learn from those early missteps, in my humble opinion, and we want to make sure that we are at the table, that you are at the table, talking about infrastructure equity in a meaningful way. I believe the answer to building back better requires us to redefine problems that we're attempting to solve through the lens of equity and inclusion. You know, I also think the answer will require us to think about who's at the decision-making table and who's missing, hence today's conversation. I'm very proud to be the newest member of the LA County Board of Supervisors. We meet on Tuesdays. And just yesterday, the board unanimously approved one of our motions to address infrastructure inequity in our region. This is the first step, from my perspective, in our ability to focus on the needs of our communities, allocate resources based on that need, and more thoughtfully engage you, the community, in decision-making. But I believe this question of how to build back better also requires us to think beyond board motions and work that is contained in silos. You know, that's what government does. We tend to silo our thinking and our work, and we've got to break out of that. So today, I've asked a couple of people who help me understand infrastructure as I too am learning, based on their expertise and the work they do and their lived experiences every day. So we've asked to join us tonight the new still CEO of LA Metro, the head of the County Department of Public Works, and a transit rider, fellow community organizer, and I'm proud to say my commissioner, to help us examine this question of equitable infrastructure investments. So I'm going to ask the panelists to very quickly introduce themselves, share what you want our viewing audience to know about you. And Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind.
Thank you, Supervisor. My name is Elizabeth Medrano, and I am a resident of the 2nd District. I'm proud to be here. It's my privilege and my honor. And yeah, I've been a bus rider since 1994 when I was a teenager and a high school student. I've been doing organizing and advocacy since 1997 formally, and I'm extremely excited to be here and have this as a beginning conversation to build the vision, realize the vision that you're talking about. I am also a pedestrian. I ride on the bus and the train. I walk a lot, and I also work in other areas of the county. So I'm excited to be here and share and build from here on, or continue the building of this work. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Elizabeth. Let's go to Mark.
Good afternoon or good evening, Supervisor. Thank you for having me. I'm Director Mark Pestrella from the Los Angeles County Public Works Agency. We are the area's Public Works Department. We serve for Supervisor in that capacity. Our agency does everything from water to sewer to storm drain to calling out on the LA River to providing you all transit. We work on private property and the public property to improve the communities that we serve there in the 2nd District. And I'm proud to be your Public Works Director and really proud to be here today. I'm a 35-year employee of the county, and I've had great experiences as a public servant, and just again, super excited to be working under your leadership, Supervisor, and looking forward to interacting with community members like Elizabeth to find out what we can do to make their neighborhoods nice.
And that is an important question and issue people raise with me all the time, Mark, trust. To the new CEO of Metro. Yay! I'm a raving fan, just so the world knows. Stephanie, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. Good evening to the constituents of the 2nd District. My name is Stephanie Wiggins, and I am the new CEO of LA Metro. We operate our buses, trains, bike share. We support all types of mobility for LA County residents, and it is a privilege to be joined here with Mark and Elizabeth. I feel it is my obligation to be a public servant to the 2nd District, and I look forward to being part of this dialogue and supporting the Supervisor in her intentions of transforming the district in an equitable way, so that the quality of life for all the constituents in the 2nd District is positive and empowering.
I appreciate that. So I had a all-staff retreat a couple weeks ago, and the facilitator really made me do a lot of homework to prepare in terms of what I wanted to share with the staff. And one of my aha moments, they come to me typically in the shower in the morning, was what role government can and must play to allow people to live their lives with dignity. And I think I've talked to both of you, all of you, about how we can do that. So I appreciate you participating tonight. And the chat is already on fire. People are already saying how much of the money of the $550 billion is coming to South LA? Who's going to be at the table? Okay, slow your roll. The president has to sign it first. Those first things first. The Senate passed it. We got to make sure the president signs it. And then trust me, we're going to go get our fair share to make sure LA County gets what it is entitled to and deserves, given our significance in the region and the state and this country. So I'm glad everybody is fired up and ready to ask their questions. Some of you submitted questions ahead of time. We're going to get to them, as many of them as we possibly can. So let's jump right into it. We've been saying the word infrastructure a lot. The Senate just passed the bill we've talked about. So I want to really ground this conversation in the scope of impact that infrastructure can have in the context of COVID-19, this dual health and economic pandemic, because that's what we're all living through today. So Mark, let me start with you. help us understand the role that infrastructure played and how you leverage your agency to help LA County as we enter into this season of recovery.
Thanks, Supervisor. And again, want to say hello to my counterparts here, Elizabeth and Stephanie, get a chance to do that. So thankful that we're able to collaborate with each other and address the issues. So yeah, infrastructure, as I've told many people, is the forgotten thing of our society. You know, many people don't understand the impact it has on our daily lives. But I can give you all some pretty explicit examples of how you're impacted. I mean, Elizabeth can tell you straight up how long it takes someone from Supervisor District 2 to actually make it to fresh food, for example. That's our transit system that's at work or not at work or not lined up properly. When you have, most people don't know about their sewer system, or they think about sewer and they don't think about it unless it's actually backed up, unfortunately. The sewer system in LA creates this healthy environment for us to live in, and it disposes of our waste properly. And actually, the water that transports it there is actually some water that we look to reutilize. So infrastructure is the built environment that makes and breaks a society, the level of quality of life of a society is the way I define it, Supervisor. It involves everything from transportation, the water we drink, the waste that we generate and managing it so it doesn't become a blight in our society. It is the housing that we live within and the shelters that we live within. It's everything from that to broadband and our digital connection to society, which creates all the opportunities that we know about: education, good jobs, and just a general quality of life. It's the energy that powers our homes and our lives. It's the healthcare, and it is a driver of our economy. Infrastructure has always been, since the beginning of time, a symbol of the society's well-being. And so it is easy to see where we're suffering. And it is not, Supervisor, unclear to me where disparity in the design of that infrastructure has created great strife in the communities of SD2 and created disadvantaged communities throughout. Now, under your leadership during the pandemic, we were able to keep county's essential infrastructure running, including the residential services like water and sewer and solid waste. We expanded our use of online services for the construction industry, and we created new jobs in that construction industry during it. So we were able to keep that going. We also were able to serve our communities through engagement through what we're doing today. We actually brought about the innovation of these different platforms to reach out. And thankfully, we learned a lot about community because we increased the number of people we were actually reaching, which is a nice thing that happened. More than 43.6 million local jobs were small business enterprises were affected by the pandemic to help keep local and small businesses afloat. So we procured this much money, 43.6 million. We helped restaurants and salons, barbershops, and other personal care services to make use of the county's road infrastructure. As you know, we allow people to move into the street and actually serve and operate within the street system. Mm-hmm. And we opened up a number of public works facilities to support COVID-19 testing and vaccination. And one thing I'm very, very proud of, Supervisor, of all the county employees, in particular here at Public Works, over 600 of my 4,000 employees acted as disaster service workers, and they did everything from distribute food to preparing the sites for vaccination, building shelters for the homeless, and transitional housing for people experiencing homeless as well. So I think COVID-19 and the pandemic just highlighted the services that we provide, and it definitely highlighted the reliance on infrastructure of our communities because many people were staying at home. And so suddenly became so important that I had power, water, sewer, and that I had internet access. And it also displayed for us some of the gaps in the services that exist. And again, Supervisor, not surprisingly, that many communities in the Supervisor District 2 were underserved in this capacity. And it's something that we're looking forward to addressing.
And have been for decades. I think that's some of the energy you see in some of the early chat about making sure South LA gets the money, acknowledging that, our core infrastructure has been ignored. And yes, in the second district, but I just have to say, it's the first thing I think government kicks the can down the road on when we're broke.
Yeah.
I know when I was at the state level, there were so many infrastructure projects from safe bridges just across the board that it's just like your house. Nobody puts a new roof on your house when you don't have a job and your money's not right. You can't. And so many of these projects have been ignored for decades that we have to play catch up. You all heard me say the last big federal bill was in 1956. That's probably how old many of our core infrastructure entities are in terms of sewer and water lines. It's really
Right.
an antiquated system. We're an old city. And so this is our opportunity, and we are paying attention. And what we are going to demand is that these dollars are invested in an equitable way. And when I say equitable, as one of 5 on the board, I don't mean divide by 5. I define equity as communities that have suffered disproportionately. And so we will be fighting to make sure that the 2nd District, with these partners here, get those resources. Stephanie, boy, didn't we have a great time to start our new jobs in the middle of a pandemic, right?
I know.
We were either very lucky or I'm not sure. So what have you learned about the gaps in infrastructure really as a result of the pandemic? And we're talking about the pandemic, but the reality is communities that have suffered disproportionately were suffering before I knew what COVID-19 is. So it's not like it's a different kind of question or community. So what have you learned about the gaps in infrastructure, and what were you more aware of in the last 18 months that you hadn't felt as much before the pandemic?
Ooh, great question, Supervisor. It really has been a real 18 months of disruption, more than a crisis that I see. It's a disruption. And it really has been an opportunity to revisit and rethink everything that we do, particularly being in transportation for more than a couple of decades, really thinking about what has been the impact to our communities, particularly underserved communities. And as you've noted, our communities were suffering even before the pandemic, but the pandemic kind of shone a spotlight on elevated these disparities that were already there, always there.
Mm-hmm.
For me, what has been foundational in the learning is that for a long time, particularly at Metro, equity was always part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But the way we dealt with it at Metro, we talked about geographic equity, right? Geographic equity, and thinking that was the way to address the populations that needed it the most. And the learning for me and being able to take on this leadership role at Metro, it's a recognition now today, and with the leadership of our board, including your championing what true equity means, we know that equity is intentional. Equity needs to be, we have to look at race. We have to look and not rely on these surrogates of geography, et cetera, that we have not looked at in the past. We did not like to, when we did transportation planning, we did not like to disaggregate the data or pull the data out. We like to look at data in groups. And yet what we know the pandemic has shown us is that this pandemic did not meet communities by geography, right? It does not discriminate, this virus did. And yet we know Black and Brown communities were impacted the most by this pandemic for underlying health disparities. Really elevates the importance of providing quality transportation. As Mark shared during the pandemic, what was heightened is the importance of transportation and the infrastructure of transportation. While some people had the types of roles where they could work remotely, at Metro, there were 500,000 people a day still needing our system. Today, we've got 730,000 a day still needing our system.
Those were our essential workers who were still going to work every day.
Yes. And so the opportunity for us, if we really think about leaning into equity and it really being part of the DNA of Metro, which is what I want to be known for, it means that we need to be making sure that our investments, we need to rebalance where our investments are, that they are really being made for the essential service, the essential workforce that needs it. And we've got to look at the data differently. While we were always well-intentioned, the reality is this pandemic has shown us that we weren't actually being able to serve the communities that needed it the most. Mm-hmm. And so I'm proud to join this organization while a lot of work has already been done before I got here, whether it's our equity office, Office of Equity and Race, whether it's actually being more intentional with our data, being focused on the customer experience, and lifting up our bus riders. One of the opportunities I had in preparing for your session is to really think about infrastructure. And I think it's so typical that we think about the physical aspects of infrastructure. Mark loves that part. But really, we don't want to forget about the people aspects of infrastructure. Both the people who rely on that infrastructure, the mobility, we know that it's a socioeconomic enabler. The more access you have to quality transportation, the better opportunities you have for education, jobs, and healthcare. And we haven't even talked about the opportunity with good infrastructure to make sure we offer great job opportunities. We offer excellent career opportunities. I have tons of stories of people in the community who've been able to get a second chance or a fair chance with Metro because we have inclusive hiring requirements on our infrastructure projects that really give people who are chronically unemployed or have had difficult times. Now they will talk about how they are in a career for life. They've been able to purchase a home, send their kids to school, et cetera. And so that's also what infrastructure does too. The connection with jobs is not incidental. It's about really enhancing the quality of life.
I agree with you, because when you think about that $550 billion investment, that will absolutely be significant. Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you with really the same question. First of all, in the chat, people are acknowledging that water also is an infrastructure issue, and that goes without saying. We completely agree. So I wanted to flag that we hear you and see those questions. But as a consistent Metro rider, and I emphasize that, Elizabeth, because joining the board, I want to support and understand the experience of Metro riders. So I ride, but I have to say I don't ride consistently, and I know you do. And so I value your perspective and input. So what were you more aware of in the last 18 months that you didn't notice or experience as much pre-pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. I do echo some of the pieces that both the director and the CEO mentioned. And I would say for me, I mean, it just made visible what maybe sometimes we want to make invisible. I mean, we discovered that we have essential workers. They've been there forever. I mean, maybe since the beginning of society, like really making the machine work.
That's right.
Right. And so also, I mean, for me as a bus rider, primarily bus rider, the bus itself as a structure, as a physical structure that we can see. I mean, it's an extension of public health, right? We needed more buses. I know Metro, for budget reasons and because ridership decreased at the moment of pandemic, we've never experienced before, most of us, right? I mean, it's been 100 years before today, before last year. So many people, including me, I became afraid, and because we don't know, we've been in the unknown. So, I've been walking more. I am taking the bus now more regularly. Today, I took 3 buses, for instance. But just thinking about the bus as, we needed and we need the buses even more because we need to keep the workers, the women, the students, the elderly safe, socially distanced, like building that, not only that confidence, that faith, that dignity. We've been talking about dignity and that respect for the bus. I mean, in LA, let's be honest, the buses have had a historical bad rap compared to, individual cars and the idea of status and acquiring things and being something that maybe, putting down public transportation when public transportation is a public benefit. Right. Especially in LA, because we tax ourselves a lot, and it ought to be, like, covering our needs. I mean, also what I noticed, I work in currently in affordable housing. I work for a women-led organization, Women Organizing Resources, Knowledge, and Services, WORKS, the acronym. And the whole of last year and part of this year, I spent 8 hours daily calling families at the work sites, affordable housing, and many of the buildings in the second district. And I mean, just becoming extremely aware of the lack of internet access, because many people didn't have access to the internet, right? So connecting them to the school district so that the school district would provide a device, a machine, or many people doing homework on the phone, sharing the phone, that's another thing. But just really, the visibility of that we were not working together, and the possibility that now we can work together, hopefully, and we are. And just finally, another piece around just the environment and our public, how do we share the public space with dignity also for all of our neighbors, however we live, without judging and without pushing aside. But we have a lot of challenges here in LA, and so how do we respect people whose homes are the streets, and how do we provide services like water right now in the summer?
Like water, exactly.
Yeah.
Water. So Mark, piggybacking off of Elizabeth's comment about internet access, the reality, the very real digital divide, and how that certainly has been amplified as a result of the pandemic. What are your comments, and what is LA County doing, and how do we have that conversation in the context of equity?
Yeah, this is a great subject, and it is something that we clearly became, I think we were, let's be honest, we were aware of the fact that internet access, 5G, the new innovation coming to LA, we were aware for some time that who was getting and who wasn't getting service was based on who could pay. So most of what we found out is we were actually, before pandemic, looking at and getting into the business of governing some of that investment. The telecommunication community clearly was running their lines to the big corporate structures in LA. And it was ancillary that the local communities, if they were in alignment with that, would get the service. This is just totally unacceptable. In fact, Supervisor, the existing disparity in broadband was so highlighted during the pandemic, as you know, and thank you for accelerating the crush of that digital divide with your motion this week. There are parts of LA County where 20% of the population lack reliable access to the internet. And in fact, in your supervisorial district, the number can be as high as 35%. And that's just totally unacceptable. I mean, I think everybody agrees on that. In fact, a recent USC study that we've been looking into found major disparities in telecommunications infrastructure serving Black majority communities. We also know that nearly a quarter or 25% of Latinos are unconnected or restricted to smartphones. This puts household, the kids at home in a real disadvantage. We saw the USD having so much trouble. I've actually had a lot of interaction with the County Office of Education on this. There's these terrible stories about the lost year and a half. And not only in their education, but in their maturity and their growth because of lack of being able to engage. The simple idea of having an internet connection. So this disadvantage not only goes to that, goes to jobs, to medicine, and all across the spectrum. Even if you think about the response to the pandemic online, how people couldn't get information, how awful it was that I can't even imagine people not being able to figure out where to take their loved ones when they came down with the symptoms of COVID. Right. In fact, the fact that they need to be able to know where to go to get their vaccinations. It's troubling and scary, and as you said in during your motion, I go to bed every night with that on my head, that there is something we can do about people's lives. As Stephanie so well said, is the infrastructure is about people. I tell my engineers at work, don't solve what the problem you're solving is public service, not how square the building is or how tall or strong it is, but how do we solve the public service situation? Take your skill set and focus on the humanity side of it. The COVID pandemic pointed this out to us. Now, the county has been piloting some interesting things. The county is working on a pilot project in the communities of Willowbrook and Linwood right now to jumpstart accessibility and affordability and adoption of broadband in these underserved and under-resourced areas. The department recently acquired, we got in the business of streetlights, Supervisor. In the Willowbrook area, we purchased 1,400 Edison streetlights with the idea that we could provide in the streetlight, actually provide connectivity through the streetlight system in the street, so we could eventually have free internet for the whole neighborhood there. This purchase was made, and we had been planning on that for some time, and this purchase is ongoing right now throughout the county. And then knowing that many residents in your area don't have broadband access informed our public outreach efforts for projects and services. We really, right away, everybody's going to internet to do the outreach. And then we found out very quickly we weren't going to reach people that way. So we were sending our people still to the field, out to physically to get to the field, but we were also using telecommunications, the phone. But again, it reduces the access to government when people are not able to reach government. And the expectation, why has race driven and lowered the expectation of the citizens in the county about what they deserve, what they get? It was so well said. Elizabeth said it's public. This is public transportation. It's public things that we're paying for. It's not just, Supervisor, the measure in Washington, D.C. We have our Measure W, our Measure H. We have our Measure K.
The people on this StreamYard, I'm sure, very likely voted for.
They're all paying for it. And so it's abundantly clear that the broadband and the digital divide needs to be crushed. And I'm glad someone on the chat mentioned water, my favorite subject. I think water is life. I happen to believe that. Water is life. Water is what you go for more than you can go for 4 days without food. You can go for many days without food, Supervisor, but you can only go 4 days or 3 days without water. Mm-hmm. Imagine a place where the water is so dirty, you can't drink it, you can't shower in it. Right. You know that place. That place is Sativa Water District, Supervisor.
Yes, I do.
Sativa Water District in our department recognizing, and the supervisor, you recognizing the importance of that water to the people's daily lives. I think it's a big success story. The basic success of bringing clean water to Sativa Water District is that we rebuilt the trust with the community that lives in that area, Willowbrook, in that area, in the Compton area. We were able to show that government can make a difference, and you can trust government. This is the problem we're having in infrastructure, Supervisor, and I need you to help us with it. There is a lack of trust, deep, for real reasons, in government, and that lack of trust causes us the inability to deliver jobs, services, transportation in a robust way to communities. And so what I love about this forum is you introducing me and my partners here to the community, holding us accountable, creating inclusivity, creating transparency. Transparency to me is the key. Once you know, you're obligated to speak up. And what we know, we're obligated to share. Supervisor is really pushing us to do that. So I'm excited, Supervisor, but yes, we have found, and it's good, we need to know. You've got to know where the gaps are before you can address them. So COVID has helped us look at that, but we have much more work to do to look at that data and react to it.
I would just say, if I could, though, for government to be trusted, we have to acknowledge that we have been ignoring the gaps.
Yeah.
The data was always there. We chose not to look at it.
Yeah.
And I think the difference now is we recognize that equity means we have to look at the policies to make sure the process and the outcomes are ones, but we have not been looking at it.
Yeah.
And, Stephanie, that's why I am a elected official. That's why I chose to run for office the first time 10 years ago, to be able to look at and help frame and establish just those policies. We're about at the halfway point, and I want to get to some of the questions in the chat. So one more for Stephanie and one more for Elizabeth before we open it up to Q&A, which you all are going to have to answer anyway, because you all are the experts. So Stephanie, given the comment you just made, what work do you intend to lead Metro that will make the biggest difference? I don't want to talk, my Gen Zer, who just turned 21 last week in middle school, started saying this saying, put the past in the casket. So we're going to put the past in the casket. We're looking to the future under your leadership. So what's the biggest difference you intend to lead Metro in terms of making a more equitable infrastructure and a more equitable Los Angeles?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First, for Elizabeth, top priority is to restore that bus service, restore it back to pre-pandemic levels. And with the support of our board and our great operations team, we're going to do that September 12th. So we'll be back in just a few weeks from now to restoring that more frequent bus service that we know is so critical for essential riders. But I think, in terms of, so it's a privilege to oversee that and make sure that happens. But we're not stopping there. We're going to really embrace focusing on the customer experience, because part of the infrastructure is making sure we have the buses out there. Then we want to make sure it's a pleasant experience for all of our riders and it meets their needs each and every time. So happy that we're partnering with LADOT, for example, to get more dedicated bus lanes so the buses actually move faster. So it's not enough just to have more buses out there. It's making sure that they don't get stuck in traffic and we have a quality experience there. I think fundamentally, if my leadership can be known for one thing, Supervisor, I'd really want it to be known for really leading with equity instead of responding with equity. And so what do I mean by that? It really is transformational for an organization of this size to really lead with equity in everything that we do. How will that look differently than it did a year ago? Well, the month I started in June, our board approved an update to our joint development policy. So we can influence affordable housing on property that we own. We don't have to wait for others. And the board, with your important vote, Supervisor, you voted to shift our focus to primarily focus on affordable housing so that we can accelerate the number of affordable housing units on Metro property. I'm very excited to do that and oversee that. I think what it will mean today, we have about 2,200 housing units. We have more than 3,000 in the pipeline. We want to get to over 10,000 in the next few years with this focus of prioritizing affordable housing on all of our joint development opportunities going forward. Secondly, I talked a little bit about workforce. We can do more in terms of our inclusive hiring. We are best in class in inclusive hiring. We can do more. I am moved by the number of women who've been pushed out of the workforce as a result of the pandemic. And a large part of that reason is childcare issues. Well, we know as an employer, Mark, you know it, you've got a department about the size of my agency, but with 11,000 people, I'm in a position to make sure we have policies that ensure we have and it can attract an inclusive workforce and provide childcare support, provide telecommuting flexibility that we know that helps women in particular who more often than not are the child giver. We know the difference it has made over the last 18 months. And then I think this will be music to your ears, Supervisor. I think you've said this in a different life. Your value is in your budget. And we have to take a hard look at our process and the outcomes of the budget. And that is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do when the nature of transportation funding and planning is not unique to Metro, but in any agency where you have the trust of the voters through them agreeing to tax themselves. Usually for accountability, there's a plan that they identify that we need to be accountable for. And so there has been, as I said earlier, a heavy emphasis on geography. And while I want to respect geography, we have to really look at equity and how we invest those dollars to manifest the mobility that everyone needs and everyone wants. And that will be a bit of a paradigm shift that I think the pandemic has provided the silver lining. That is an opportunity with elected leadership like yourself that gives us bureaucrats the flexibility and freedom that says, yes, We can
Right.
be intentional. We can speak the language of Black and Brown and those who have been disadvantaged, and we can actually bring forward recommendations related to that. I think pre-pandemic, with all due respect, at least in my neck of the woods, that would have been a harder message to bring forward.
Yeah.
Now, I think it was always the right thing to do, but now the time is right to do that. But it's still going to be, whenever you're talking about shifting resources, it's not an easy decision to have.
It is not, and I couldn't agree with you more. That COVID, that has been for me in a twisted kind of way, the silver lining in this cloud. That it ripped the Band-Aid off.
Right.
It's much like when Kennedy went to Appalachia and took cameras,
Yeah.
and people saw
Yeah.
that kind of poverty for the first time. That's what this horrific public health economic pandemic has given us, the opportunity to build back better. And
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to have folks here with me who are committed and are rolling up your sleeves to doing just that. I appreciate you. Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you before we go to questions, because I think it's important that I end with you. For the community members who are listening and participating, and there are a lot of them because they are blowing up chat for real. And Stephanie said faster buses. She also knows clean, safe. I saw those comments, and trust me, as the outgoing chair of the operations committee, I've heard her talk about that, so she gets it. But Elizabeth, so many of the people who are participating may be asking themselves what more they can do to help push the region forward. So tell us briefly, if you will, how the work you're doing is moving that needle, and how can community members get involved? Because it's not just me, it's not just the four of us, and people get to tell us what to do via chat. No, everybody has a role to play in helping us move this collective agenda. So tell us the work you've been organizing for many years now, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I mean, first I want to say also I'm super encouraged to hear my colleague panelists here talk about, we are water. Bottom line, we are water. We cannot deny that. I'm really encouraged to hear the desire to collaborate more in a cohesive way and leading with principles such as transparency and such as equity. That those are the goals. That's the leading, banner. And one of the ways to show that is in the spending plan, that the dollars are congruent with the needs of the very people who have been, for decades, like you were saying, relegated and, left behind. So I just want to say that for me as a community organizer, as a bus rider, as a pedestrian, as a parent, as a woman, I think over 50% of the population, the ridership, are women. And so it's very important that we participate. I don't know how many people are in the audience. And I would invite people to the West Side Central Service Council, which meets once a month, actually is meeting tomorrow in an extra meeting. It happens tomorrow, where it's a public meeting. People can hear directly from Metro staff, on projects and what is happening, and give comments. That's one way. Another way to participate, it's to attend the Public Safety Advisory Committee meetings that happen every 2 weeks. Look it up in the, go to Metro and look it up. I don't have the address here. Maybe we can put the address.
We can put it up. Yes.
Yeah. Also, I've been attending Metro board meetings for years and decades, to stay involved, to provide comments, to send letters, approach your county supervisor. District 2. I'm so excited that we have a full house of women representing the 5 pieces of land in this big county, and I'm really encouraged by that. Also, I work with Alliance for Transit, ACT LA.
Mm-hmm.
We are a network of many organizations that put out a report called Metro as a Sanctuary, and we're talking about the very things that we're all talking about: creating jobs, Metro owns a lot of land. How do we recreate those those pieces of land as community locations that are like humanly caring for people, that are people-centered? How do we become more creative around taking care of public transportation without the need of law enforcement, for instance, and engaging the community in those efforts? How do we support our neighbors who are unhoused, and in a fashion that is, again, with dignity, with respect, and support them and guide them to various services that exist in the city and the county. I would look it up also, Metro as a sanctuary.
I was just going to say, I want to thank you because you just gave the examples. And I'm thinking about when I sit on the Metro board meeting or the operations meeting or the finance meeting, the people who call in and talk about, years of service on these voluntary committees, that I was proud to carry a motion to try to figure out, for Metro to figure out how to reimburse people, because you just ticked off so many committees, Elizabeth. Everybody needs to understand there's a role to play. It's not just about pointing their finger at me or having expectations of me alone. There is so much room and space, and we need to hear those voices. We need people to really engage so we know what community wants, what community has defined as important for them.
Yeah, and I have a couple of other pieces. Thank you so much, because again, just as we pay for this public service, we also get to continue to invest with our care, with our connection, with our regard. I'm really encouraged. I'm really extremely happy that, and many other bus riders, that we've had a fairless transit, right, for this month, which for sure supports, it doesn't alleviate or fix the inequality, the inequity that has been there forever. But for sure, people are able to get another meal on the table, right? Maybe, don't extend their debt to the Department of Water and Power. I don't know. I hear those stories every day. I'm also, talking about different changes. I didn't do the whole research prior to this, but I believe still Metro in LA has one of the largest and the most modern fleets in the country, right? This has taken, at least 26 years of, at least part of the work I've done with other groupings. So we cannot deny that. And the more engagement from the community, the better, because it's our investment. It's our care. And finally, because I'm here and I have the mic for one more second, the board of Metro is composed of the 5 county supervisors, the mayor, which is going to be changing soon. Things are going to be shifting. It is a dream, and I'm sure it can become a reality, that bus riders are actually sitting at the table as board members. Being part of committees is excellent, and we need to continue that, but having that voice right there. Students, right? We've been hearing about students because we want a universal fairless transit. College students, I know college students who are living in their cars.
Me too.
I think you've heard that. So I'm just putting it out there as part of the vision to have riders at the table.
I heard you loud and clear. And I'm sure the CEO did as well. So thank you for that, Elizabeth. So we've got lots of chat activity. They are on fire. Lots of comments, Stephanie, about fairless. Lots of comments about fairless. One interesting question, and this really may be for me. In order to address inequity, we first need to know what and where, and how can we increase transparency? I have 2 responses. I think, the county budget system, we need to figure out every level of government. Stephanie talked about her goal with Metro, but every budget process needs to be as inclusive and transparent as possible for community members to engage. I think that's one. Secondly, the board, prior to my arrival, created an initiative, the Anti-Racism Initiative. Dr. D'Artagnan, I can't think of D'Artagnan's last name. That's so awful. He is the new leader of this initiative for LA County. And what he is doing, working collaboratively with CBOs and institutions of higher learning, academic institutions in LA County, is really developing, a protocol by which we in every department will use as a template to really assess areas of service that they provide and to really help define equity. And so we're going to really rely on these tools. Orange County just released their tool. I read about it in the Times last week. I sent the article to our CEO. So I think these are areas in which government is, we're not going to just use the word. You're not just going to, take my word for it that the second district needs more help than others, but there really will be a method, a methodology and tools that each department will be expected to use as they are developing new programming as a result of the ARP funding. And so I think it will be easier for us to define and name programs that are going to meet this new litmus test around equity. And I'm proud to be on a board of supervisors that has that vision and gets it and will lead. We had a question from someone from the Advancement Project. All right, who's helping D'Artagnan with this tool, actually. How will Metro and the board push for changing policies so that we can operationalize racial equity? Because Anisha says, given Prop 209, are we limited in terms of how hard you can push, Stephanie, around issues around equity?
We actually have a track record of being able to deliver in spite of Prop 209. We developed our small business program that provided more opportunities for women and underrepresented small businesses, minority-owned small businesses. I think, again, as the supervisor just shared, we also got a presentation by the county of your equity tool. It is amazing. We are developing our own equity assessment tool, but we see the benefit of sharing the data for the overlay. But when there is actually data that we are intentional about and we make it visible to the decision makers, then that provides the transparency. And it's hard when you are faced with it, the intentionality is there. It's hard to look away and deny it. So that's how the board's going to do it. The board has already approved our equity platform. There was just a motion last month to look at our equity focus maps and go deeper in our definition of equity focused communities. But I also think, again, leveraging this tool at the county to make our equity assessment tool when we're looking at mobility investments even stronger, and potentially as we develop the FY23 budget, those are the tools we will be providing staff and then of course the board to make these types of policy decisions. I'm really excited. I'll just plug briefly. We have 2 telephone town hall meetings coming up, one September 29th and one October 5th. And those are going to be our first listening sessions as we start discussing the budget process for next year.
Supervisor, I'd love to just chime in for a second on this if I can. First of all, I think it's actually going to be a lot easier than we think. I'm an optimist. I've always been one. First, we have the progressive leaders in place in these 5 women who are very much wanting us to look at health outcomes, the quality of life. These are not race-based desirables and outcomes. They're like human outcomes. So it really isn't necessarily need to be a net zero sum game here. It doesn't have to be winners and losers. In fact, what's interesting is we're smarter today. Maybe in the past, What worked in the past is we divided by 5. We were geographic, as you said, or, we were watershed based. I build a dam here because it's physically where the dam goes. But the fact of the matter is the reservoir upstream is capturing water for all of the citizens of that watershed and spreading it for all this. And I think all of our infrastructure can be looked at it from a different lens. We will absolutely find out about the disparity when we pull this out. It'll be clear, the disparity. What we need to teach our communities about is it is not a net zero sum game. It actually, an investment in infrastructure anywhere in the district can potentially rise all boats in the district. So we do not have to have voters afraid to vote for an infrastructure bill. My goodness, how scary is it that people divide that on political lines?
Right.
That's the saddest thing for people, for us, those of us who have been in the business for years know. Infrastructure is not about the politic, although politics gets into it and it ruins it. We mostly deal with natural resources in my department. Natural resources don't know the lines of race, color, or, they know natural resources.
But Mark, people do, and people have made decisions that have created bad outcomes. What
you're letting us do by your leadership and by your recent motion and by providing tools, as Stephanie said, in our budgeting, is to look at this from a science-based perspective and from a human's perspective. I think COVID allowed us to start to look at that, right? The health inputs. And in fact, if you don't treat one part of the society, the other is going to suffer too.
That's true.
And I think I have a great hope that when we pull this data out and as we become more transparent in our processes, that equity will be a lens. It will be easy for us to prove that equity looks different than what we used to call it or how we saw it before. That equity will become the driver. Because if we're looking at we're looking at opportunity, you're looking at human health. Those are common human things. They don't have to do with the color of our skin. They have to do with the way our community, the well-being of the overall community. And we already know, Supervisor, the investments are going to have to be made in very specific areas to raise the boats. We already know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the last point I was going to make. We absolutely agree. Very quickly, Mark, because you are into it and you talk too long, but this is what I'm just teasing you. I'm teasing.
I know how to take a lead.
This is an important question. I know it's 6:28 and I'm gonna honor people's time, but I have 2 more quick questions. Mark, for you, this came from, I believe, the Compton Tenants Union. How is our Public Works Department working toward ensuring the safety of housing in our community? And of course, everybody points to the Miami building collapse.
Yes. Yes, actually, one of the titles I have is believable. One of the many is building official, and we are currently working on identifying all at high risk structures that share the commonality of the Miami event, that condominium structure. And we are going to be proposing legislation and ordinances locally to improve our awareness, of situational awareness of those structures. And it'll include regular and some frequency inspection of the structures in order for the owners of those structures to maintain them at some level of public safety, some minimum level of public safety over the life of that structure. Okay. So that's happening fast. And we've been visiting Miami and talking to them virtually about what happened there. And we have grave concerns about certain areas in the county where the conditions are right for such a thing to happen.
But you and your department are on top of it.
We are on that.
Fabulous. Last question for Stephanie and Elizabeth. This is a good one because it's a question I ask myself often as a 3rd-generation native Angelino. How can we make public transit the preferred option of travel for Los Angeles?
Who wants to go? Oh, I will just say that's kind of like my vision. That's my moonshot goal. That by the end of my tenure, Metro will be the first choice that people look to. Now, I say that is ambitious and moonshot, but what it means that we are providing a safe, more attractive, convenient, gets you to where you need to go when you need it, when you need to get there. And it is such an inviting experience. We all know when we've had just a most outstanding experience. And we want you to choose Metro instead of looking for your car keys or something else. And so it's going to be a lot of work. It takes intentionality. It takes funding. It takes understanding the system and the needs of our writers, which I think we can do better at. But I don't think it's impossible. I've been outside of the country, traveled outside of the country. They do it in other countries. They do it in Washington, D.C. They do it in New York. We could do it here.
They do it in the Bay Area with
They
Bart.
do.
Right, yes, it can be done. Elizabeth, one thing you think.
I would
People more
say,
rely on the public benefit, as you so beautifully said. How can we
Yeah.
get more people to use the public benefit of public transit?
I would say let it be known that that the buses are free, and that, advocates and many people, I mean, we're working with the board, and I'm excited about Stephanie being on board, and everyone. We want a universal, fairless transit system, increase ridership. You were talking about bus lanes. Use those freeways that already destroyed communities. Get the buses, more buses there. I'm encouraging through this platform right now, friends and strangers and people who are watching, and that become open, leave your car and be open to try this. I mean, we're talking about pollution. We live in areas that are hot spots, right? That, former industrial sites that already have a lot of pollution. And then on top of that, the pollution that we've been creating for the last decades. How can, work with us, work together, think about community. This pandemic showed us, made visible a lot of the things that we've been ignoring, we didn't want to see. Now, like you said, we rip the bandage and let's work together on that. Think about the common welfare of everyone. I don't know, use all the social media, and really commit to engage the bus riders. And with that, building trust, transparency, and equity as the principles, we can do the commercials. People do the commercials. It's great on the bus. Get on it.
Because I reframed the question. The question was originally written, how can you make public transit the preferred option? And it's not about you, whoever the you is. It's how can all of us. And I think it starts with trust. Some of us are going to have to leave the car behind and just try it. Stephanie can build a state-of-the-art, most amazing system. And if we don't shift our own regional culture to try it, we won't have gotten any further. Last plug I would put in answering the question, we need more bus drivers. Metro has been recruiting, and so we want more buses. We need more professionals who will be hired and trained, who can operate them. So how are we going to make this a public transit society? We're going to trust, and we're going to hire more bus drivers. Thank you to the three of you. This has been a dynamic hour and 4 minutes. I'm sorry that we went over, but I really deeply appreciate the three of you giving us your time. And clearly, the hundreds who are viewing this on YouTube, Facebook, and StreamYard appreciate it too, based on the energy around the chat. So I thank the three of you. So it's clear that community organizing makes a difference. So you've got to get involved. To that end, we'll be sharing a link to a resource guide we've created on how to access services and engage in Metro and public works decision making. You all wanted to know, how will South LA get the money? How can we make sure the people at the table? It's up to you to help us and get involved as well. So that link will be shared. This pandemic taught us a lot of lessons. And one thing it did teach us, which is a good thing, which is that government can move quickly. We can work collaboratively to solve complex and common goals. It taught us that when we're willing to swim outside of our lanes, when we're willing to believe in a bold vision, what we can achieve, we can make change. And so I'm proud of that. And that's the element of my COVID experience onboarding to the Board of Supervisors, I'm going to hold on to. And I think lastly, LA is leading bold work to repair harm from decades of disinvestment. And we have an opportunity to set a national example for a more just and equitable Los Angeles. We've talked about Fairless. We've talked about the work that Mark is leading. I am really, really proud to be your partner. So let me thank Elizabeth and Stephanie and Mark for giving us your time this evening. And I want to thank all of you for clearly, fully engaging with us tonight. I look forward to keep you updated on how we actualize, how we operationalize the infrastructure goals and visions and moonshots, as Stephanie said, that we talked about tonight. Thank you for joining us for our roadmap to a thriving second district, and we'll see you next time. Everybody be safe.